The first $100,000 is not about becoming impressive. It is about becoming unafraid. That is the first thing I want to tell you. Most people hear six figures and think status. A better car, a nicer apartment, a cleaner outfit, a different kind of social media photo. That is how poor people think about money. Rich people do not start there. The first real pile of cash is not a trophy. It is air. It is silence. It is the first time your mind stops being chewed alive by tomorrow. Can I pay rent? Can I buy groceries? Can I cover my phone bill? Can I keep the lights on? Can I survive one mistake? Can I survive one weak month? Can I survive one bad client, one broken transmission, one emergency room visit, one bad quarter? That is what the first $100,000 actually solves. Not your ego, your panic. The source document opens on exactly that emotional truth. It says that despite much larger exits and distributions later, the moment that felt richest was the first $100,000 in the bank, because before that life was still being lived at the level of groceries, rent, dues, phone bills, and basic survival. That is the right opening because it reveals what most people misunderstand immediately. The first six figures are not luxury money. They are oxygen money. Fay Falicite Fay Turn 45 File 0 Fay. That is why I do not think of the first $100,000 as a wealth milestone. I think of it as a cognitive milestone. Before it, your brain belongs to urgency. After it, part of your brain comes back. And once your mind comes back, strategy becomes possible. You cannot think 10 years out if your landlord owns every thought. You cannot build a real future if every decision is still being made inside the emotional weather of next Tuesday. Bills. That is what people who are not poor never fully understand. Ambition sounds beautiful when the pantry is full. Ambition sounds abstract when rent is due. That is why I want to be very direct. If I wanted to make my first $100,000 in 2026, I would not begin with branding. I would not begin with dreaming bigger. I would not begin with passive income fantasies. I would begin by turning myself into a machine that can bank cash fast. That is the whole game. And that game is much less glamorous than people want it to be. The source lays it out in 6 steps, but the deeper structure underneath those steps is even more valuable. It is not really a get-rich plan. It is an anti-fragility plan. Strip costs, recover time, learn a monetizable skill, buy leverage with saved money, increase active income, refuse lifestyle inflation. That is the skeleton. Fay Falicite Fay Turn 45 File 0 Fay. I want to turn that skeleton into something sharper. I call it the 100K escape protocol. Not because $100,000 makes you free forever, because it gets you out of immediate captivity. That is what matters first. Let me give you the master metaphor for the whole thing. I call it the pressure chamber. Most people are trying to build a business, learn a skill, and plan a future while standing inside a pressure chamber. Bills are pushing in from every direction. Food, housing, car debt, distraction, social expectation, tiny luxuries dressed up as normal life. The pressure is so constant that they do not realize the pressure itself is the problem. They think they have a motivation issue. They think they need one more productivity system. They think they need one more podcast number. They need less pressure because pressure makes people short. Term pressure makes people impulsive. Pressure makes people reach for comfort instead of leverage. Pressure makes people spend today as money because tomorrow still feels too uncertain to invest in. That is why the first move in the protocol is not make more. It is stop bleeding. The source says this without apology. Cut all costs so you can take more risk. Food, clothes, housing, transport, everything. Live with family if you can. Share rooms if you must. Wear what you already own. Buy discount groceries. Use a paid-off car if possible. The entire point is to force a gap between what comes in and what goes out. Fay Falicite Fay Turn 45 File 0 Fay. That is not motivational fluff. That is war. And if you do not understand that, you will stay broke much longer than necessary. The first mechanism is what I call compression. When I say compression, I mean you deliberately squeeze your lifestyle until cash starts appearing. Not because deprivation is noble, because optionality is a person earning $4,000 a month and spending $3,900 is poor. A person earning $2,500 a month and spending $1,200 is dangerous. That is a sentence the whole middle class needs to hear. Income matters, margin matters more at the beginning, because margin is what buys experimentation. Margin is what buys tools. Margin is what buys tutoring. Margin is what buys one more month of trying. Margin is what keeps a stupid mistake from becoming a fatal one. That is why the Source ES stories about sleeping in shared rooms and keeping rent absurdly low matter. People hear those details and focus on discomfort. I focus on what that discomfort purchased. It purchased runway, it purchased time, it purchased the right not to die every time life missed by 1 inch. Fay Felicite, Fay turn 45, file 0 Fay. A lot of people want the first $100,000 while still trying to look like someone who already has it. That is the stupidest game in the world, because the first $100,000 is almost always built-in camouflage, quiet clothes, cheap rent, ugly car, boring life, little applause. You do not get there by spending money on the appearance of success. You get there by turning appearance into fuel. That is compression. The second mechanism is time extraction. This is the part people hate because it removes their favorite excuse. The source says bluntly that the 9 to 5 is not what is killing your dream. What is killing it is the waste of the 24-hour blocks most people still have access to, the morning block and the evening block. It then reframes the day. If you still work a job, your business and skill building happen in those recovered blocks. If you do not work the job anymore, the day gets split into promotion, delivery, and building. Fay Felicite, Fay turn 45, file 0 Fay. That is the right framework. Because poor people always talk about needing more time. Rich people talk about reclaiming hidden time. The hours are there. They are just full of low value, leakage, scrolling, streaming, aimless commuting, half attention, messy switching, talking about doing. Instead of doing, the source also makes a point I think is much more profound than it sounds. Your job is not the dream killer. Your fragmented attention is Fay Felicite, Fay turn 45, file 0 Fay. Exactly. I have never believed that employment is the primary enemy. The enemy is unowned time. Unowned time gets consumed by whatever is nearest. A video, a text thread, a meeting that did not need to exist, a vague evening, a slow morning, a half-tired weekend. That is how years disappear. This is why I call the second mechanism time extraction. You are not finding time. You are ripping it out of a life that would otherwise waste it. And the source S-maker, manager distinction is critical. Here maker time is empty calendar time. Deep work, learning, building, writing, editing, scripting, selling, constructing manager time is fragmented coordination, calls, messages, approvals, reactions. The source says clearly that these need to be separated because task switching destroys output. Fay Felicite, Fay turn 45, file 0 Fay. That is one of the highest return truths in the whole piece. A lot of people with ambition still lose because they try to build a new future in 5-minute fragments. It does not work. You cannot build a skill in interruptions. You cannot build a business in notifications. You cannot build wealth in reaction mode. So if I were trying to get to my first $100,000 in 2026, I would defend the first 4 to 6 hours of my productive window like a madman. No meetings, no social media, no text, no news, no chatter, just output. That is not because discipline is sexy. It is because uninterrupted hours compound faster than motivation ever will. The third mechanism is what I call market-paid skill selection. This is another place where most people lose years. They ask the wrong question. They ask, what do I like? Bad beginning. The better question is, what are people already paying for? The source says exactly that. Research a skill that people are already spending money on the business to busyness side. Look at the actual activities companies pay for. Making content, outreach, funnel building, sales, customer service, implementation, editing, copywriting, lead generation, and so on. On the business to consumer side, inspect what ordinary consumers already buy. Then pick one. The source S111 rule is one product or service, one avatar, one channel, until you make your first million. Fay Felicite, Fay turn 45, file 0 Fay. That is why I call it market-paid skill selection. You do not need the perfect dream first. You need the shortest route to cash, generating competence. That is a very different way to think. Most people want a career that expresses them. Fine. Wonderful later. At the beginning, I want expression to shut up and revenue to start talking. Because the first $100,000 is not an identity project. It is a solvency project. This is where many intelligent people make a fatal error. They over-romanticize the choice. They spend months exploring possibilities when they should have picked a lane the market already values and started collecting reps. That is the cost of sophistication addiction. You do not need 1,000 possibilities. You need one paid path. And I want to sharpen the source S111 rule even further. One offer, one buyer, one channel, until the machine works. Because complexity is what broke people buy when they are afraid of discipline. Discipline says, stay here, stay on the one thing, get the first dollars. then the first repeat clients, then the first referrals, then the first process, then the first retained earnings, then the first stack of cash. That is how the first $100,000 actually gets made. Not from looking around, from locking in. The fourth mechanism is learning velocity. The source makes one of the best points in the whole file when it defines learning not as content consumption, but as changed behavior in the same conditions, same room, same laptop, different output. That is learning. It also says the real metric is not 10,000 hours, but 10,000 iterations, because what actually makes skill is repeated action plus feedback. Then it gives a process: do lots of volume, study the top 10% of outcomes, identify what the top performers are doing differently, test the important differences, repeat. Fay file site, Fay turn 45 file 0 Fay, that is gold, because it cuts through one of the biggest lies in self-improvement. What is not learning? Collecting advice is not learning. Feeling inspired is not learning. Learning is changed output. That is why I call this mechanism learning velocity. You are not trying to become knowledgeable. You are trying to become effective faster than the average person. And effectiveness comes from feedback loops. This is where poor people again lose years. They consume, they do not iterate, they listen, they do not test, they save quotes, they do not build skill. So if I wanted my first $100,000 fast, I would treat every day like a laboratory produce, measure, compare, extract the top 10%, repeat. That is the whole thing. The source is also right that the fastest way to learn is direct help from somebody already good tutoring community. One-on-one correction apprenticeship in some form. Fay file site, Fay turn 45 file 0 Fay. Exactly. Everyone wants to save money by avoiding direct help. Then they burn a year learning crooked. That is false thrift. A correction that saves you 6 months is cheaper than 6 bad months. That is why learning velocity matters more than cheapness. Once you have enough compression to create investable cash. Which brings me to the fifth mechanism, capital deployment. This is where the game changes from saving to building. The source says the money you save should go into 3 buckets: tools, implementation help, and trial attempts. Tools can be software, systems, platforms, CRMs, landing, page builders, editing tools, implementation help. Can be courses, communities, tutoring, or direct instruction. Trial attempts are the experiments themselves, such as ad spend, content production, testing offers, or whatever is needed to get real market feedback. Fay file site, Fay turn 45 file 0 Fay, that is why I call it tool. Risk deployment. Most people want cash because cash feels safe. That is understandable. But the first $100,000 does not come from hoarding every dollar forever. It comes from routing saved dollars into leverage, fast enough that active income starts rising. That is the point. The source says it plainly later. Billionaires do not start with passive income. They start with monster active income. They get rewarded for risks they are finally able to take because they first created some time and some money. Fay file site, Fay turn 45 file 0. Fay, exactly. Passive income is a celebration stage. Active income is a war stage, and a great many people fail because they want stage 2 rewards while still refusing stage 1 effort. The first 100 is made by increasing active income violently. Higher ticket skill, better close rate, faster output, more clients, better delivery, stronger offers, bigger capacity. That is the path. And the saved cash is not there to make you feel secure while you do nothing. It is there to buy leverage, software that removes manual drag, guidance that shortens the path, attempts that generate information. That is why I use the word deployment. Money parked is safety. Money deployed correctly is acceleration. You need both. But in the first $100,000 journey, the people who win know when to hold and when to deploy. The sixth mechanism is lifestyle refusal. This may be the most important mechanism of all because it is where so many people lose right when they are finally starting to win. The source says it cleanly: do not increase your lifestyle. It gives examples of people making enormous monthly incomes and still spending every dollar. It also tells the author's own story of earning around $20,000 a month while still splitting a room and paying only a few $100s in rent, because the goal was not to look better. The goal was to accumulate enough cash to open the next location, attend the next conference, learn more, and keep expanding. Fay file site, Fay turn 45 file 0 Fay, that is the rule. And if you violate it, the first $100,000 will run away from you forever, because lifestyle is a hungry animal. The moment income rises, lifestyle starts whispering that you earned relief: a nicer car, a bigger place, better clothes, delivery food, convenience, memberships, travel, softness. What lifestyle never tells you is that it is a thief. It steals the exact pile of money that was finally giving you escape velocity. That is why I call this mechanism lifestyle refusal, not lifestyle control. Control sounds negotiable. Refusal is clearer. When income rises, your lifestyle does not get promoted. Your bank balance gets promoted. Your optionality gets promoted. Your learning budget gets promoted. Your next business attempt gets promoted. Your future gets promoted. You stay ugly longer. That is how you win. A lot of people can make money. Far fewer can keep the first serious pile of it. And keeping is what turns temporary good months into the first real buffer of your adult life. Now let me pull the whole protocol together so you can see what the 6 steps really are beneath the surface. Compression, time, extraction, market paid, skill selection, learning velocity, tool, risk deployment, lifestyle refusal. Do you see what changed? This is no longer how to make money. This is how to turn yourself from a fragile worker into a cash banking machine. That is the real transformation. And I want to make one more point because it is buried inside the source and it matters enormously. The first $100,000 is a checkpoint, not the destination. The source says that once that first bank's 6 figures appeared, it became possible to think long term. That is the real gift. It was not that the person became wealthy forever. It was that survival stopped shouting loudly enough to erase long-range thinking. Fay file a site, fay turn, 45 files, 0 fay. That is exactly how I think about it too. Maslow before empire, floor before ceiling. If the floor is unstable, all high vision becomes theater. People say they want to change the world. Wonderful. Can you pay rent for the next 12 months without begging? Can you survive a dry season? Can you fund one serious experiment? Can you buy yourself enough calm to stop making low-grade desperate decisions? That is what the first $100,000 buys, not greatness, a real starting line. Now let me tell you what I would actually do if it were 2026 and I had to start again from almost nothing. First, I would make my life offensively cheap, not more mindful. Cheap shared housing if needed. Used clothes, simple food, no entertainment that costs real money, paid off ugly car if possible, no performance spending. Second, I would identify one market paid skill that businesses already buy every day and that I could sell without needing to invent demand from scratch sales. Copy, content, editing, outreach, lead generation, appointment setting, implementation, AI workflow building, something with real demand. Third, I would defend the first 4 to 6 hours of my best working time like a jealous king. No calls, no noise, no social feeds. Just build forth. I would get reps so fast it would look boring from the outside. Volume feedback, more volume, better output, more feedback, repeat, until my work stopped being amateur. Fifth, I would spend saved cash only on things that either saved time, raised skill, or tested an offer in the real market. Sixth, the moment money started coming in, I would pretend it was not mine yet. I would bank it, reinvest from it, learn from it, but not celebrate with it. That is how the first $100,000 happens. Not from one massive break, from sustained aggression applied to a simple machine. Now I want to say something a little harder. Many people will hear a plan like this and say it is too extreme. Good extreme compared to what? Extreme compared to endless drift. Extreme compared to spending your 20s and 30s performing adulthood while owning nothing. Extreme compared to making just enough money to stay tired. Extreme compared to always talking about starting but never buying yourself enough margin to actually do it. Yes, it is extreme. That is why it works. The average life is expensive mostly because it is careless. Careless with rent, careless with time, careless with entertainment, careless with food, careless with what is being learned, careless with what is being ignored, careless with rising income. Carelessness is what keeps people poor long after their paycheck says they should be improving. This protocol is simply the opposite of carelessness, and that is why it can feel severe. But severity in the short run is often mercy in the long run, because the person who gets to $100,000 first is not just richer, he is calmer, more strategic, harder to manipulate, harder to rush, harder to scare, and those qualities compound even faster than money. So let me leave you with the cleanest truth in this whole story. The first $100,000 is not where wealth becomes flashy. It is where fear stops being in charge. That is why it matters, not because the number is magical, because the number buys back mental bandwidth. It gives you room to think, room to build, room to fail once and continue, room to stop making survival decisions and start making investment decisions. That is the checkpoint. That is the unlock. And if I wanted to hit it in 2026, I would not pray for a break. I would build a machine. I would cut harder than other people are willing to cut, work more focused than other people are willing to work, learn faster than other people are willing to learn, risk saved cash more intelligently than other people are willing to risk it. And I would stay uglier, cheaper, and quieter for longer than other people can emotionally tolerate, because that is how the first real pile of money gets banked. Not by looking rich, by refusing to need to look rich long enough that one morning you open the account, see 6 figures sitting there, and realize something changed. The world is not softer. You are just no longer one bill away from panic. That is what the first $100,000 really is. Not money, breathing room. And once you finally have room to breathe, the rest of your future gets a real chance to begin.